Welcome back to What Happened, the show that still hasn't covered GTA, the trilogy, the definitive edition, the disaster of the year. However, the grains of sand are rapidly running out, Rockstar, so take the time now to make peace with whatever deity you pray to. Anyway, speaking of deities, GODHAND! Simply put, this is one of the most unique stories in Capcom's history of, unique stories, but fortunately not for the reasons we usually discuss on this very program. See, when GODHAND was released during the halcyon days of 2006, it very quickly accrued a kind of reputation, and unfortunately, it wasn't a 100% positive one.
I don't think you realize what you're getting yourself into, pendejo!
There's been plenty of rumors, speculation, and inaccuracies about its development, some of which I hope to stomp out today. So sit down, chill out, and grab a smoothie and/or puppy pizza. It's time to find out what happened to GODHAND.
Finally, a boss fight.
In the mid-2000s, Capcom acquiesced to the concerns of some of their creators like Hideki Kamiya and Atsushi Inaba, who sought more independence and creative freedom within the company. This is what formed Clover Studio and the creation of Okami, which was set to be the biggest title many on the team had or would ever work on. Now, Capcom was putting out a lot of horror and action titles that were making big bank, as was the style at the time. But the flip side of that, of course, was a sharp decrease in the greenlighting of adventure and RPG titles.
And no one knows what it's like to be hated.
The formation of Clover was an attempt to offset that, as many of the creative leads were burnt out on the conveyor belt of edgy 2000s fare. But, even more unfortunately, the declining sales of the Beautiful Joe series and its spin-offs did put some pressure on Clover to generate profits, and it's at this point where Shinji Mikami, the twisted mind behind the seminal Capcom classic, Goof Troop, decided to join up. After the arduous and stressful development of Resident Evil 4, he wanted to try something new and felt Clover was just the place to do it. Opportunity is all about timing, however, and when Mikami was added to the studio's ranks, they were all busy painting up a storm with good old Amaterasu. In fact, Okami already had its creative leads in place, so there really wasn't much for Mikami to actually do. Therefore, he spent the first few months of his time there drafting up multiple ideas for possible future games, but eventually grew frustrated at the fact he wasn't able to create or contribute in a more concrete way. He then asked Inaba if he really had to wait more than a year for them to finish up Okami before he could lead on their next project. Inaba understood his plight, but said unless he was willing to work with another team outside of Clover, there really wasn't much else he could do. But as it turns out, Mikami was absolutely fine with that. He just really wanted to make something. Clover was also fine with this, as they realized, what with Okami's development taking so long and it being an expensive game to produce, it would be a good idea to get more product out there in the meantime, proving to Capcom higher-ups that they were a financially viable team. Now, while Mikami had written several game scenarios, the inspiration to go with a combat-heavy brawling title came from an unexpected source. In a 2020 video interview, the legendary game creator didn't mince words. Capcom USA were making a sequel to Final Fight in the United States. When I played it, it was shit. I used to enjoy Final Fight, so I was mad that a series I had liked ended up like this. I thought that I wanted to make a game like that if I ever had a chance. Now, just think about this for 1 second. Final Fight Streetwise helped inspire GODHAND.
I have never been so embarrassed.
So anyway, no wait, I'm sorry, we have to look at that statement a little bit more closely than not at all. Okay, around late 2004, early 2005, Streetwise was rebooted into the pissy-looking schlock we all know and hate today. Mikami must have played an early build of that come mid or late 2005, and considering how the final game of Streetwise ended up, yeah, it's no wonder he thought it was Kuso. If you need a refresher on Streetwise's rather bumpy development, well, Bing bong!
Fuck your life!
Okay, so while it seems like flexing on Capcom USA played at least a small part in GODHAND's creation, Mikami also wanted this new project to stand out and for it to do its own thing. Thus, he had his heart, or head, set on creating a melee-based action game played exclusively from a first-person perspective. That was the original idea, and they even got a very basic prototype of this idea up and running, but was scrapped just as quickly, most likely due to the complexity of creating such a thing. See, Clover meant for this to be a quick project they could produce while they were busy with Okami, and trying to suss out all the details and technical headaches of creating first-person fisting would kinda go against that whole MO. And let's be real here, they were never gonna top Breakdown anyway. Yeah, got it in there. Now, it's time to answer the question, if Clover were too busy whipping around the celestial brush, who was gonna help Mikami? Enter Value Wave, a smaller support studio that Capcom utilized whenever they needed a few extra hands. They pitched in on a bunch of Mega Man X titles as well as the aforementioned Beautiful Joe spin-offs. Mikami would still direct the project, with Inaba producing, along with a very small team of Clover character modelers. But in terms of level design, programming, sound, animation and such, it was all gonna be Value Wave.
Say what?
In addition to this being a quick project, it also had to be made frugally, as Okami was taking more than the lion's share of allocated funds, so to save costs on developing new technology, they're gonna need to share some. Okami's engine is what GODHAND runs on, and while that obviously had its benefits, taking the core of a massive adventure game and using it to power a straightforward action brawler also had some drawbacks. Using this engine would also make sure this would stay a PS2 exclusive, because even though Capcom was supporting the Xbox and GameCube in the mid-2000s, they simply didn't have time or money to spread the game across multiple formats. And since the first-person idea didn't pan out, the team thought it best to go for an over-the-shoulder camera perspective, which, while easier, didn't make it look like many other titles at first glance. Fortunately, Clover always did things their own way. From the beginning, GODHAND was never intended to be super serious, and always had been designed to have a good sense of humor. Remember, Mikami wanted to do something very different from Resident Evil, so he filled it with dad jokes about 70s and 80s Japanese pop culture, and lampooned just about every action movie or media trope. With that in mind, it also forced the team to prioritize certain elements over others. They simply didn't have time or manpower to create detailed open levels with multiple paths and points of interest, or complicated explosive set pieces. Like any good director, Mikami had to make some hard decisions with the time and budget that he did have, so he chose to focus on a unique in-depth fighting system, detailed character models, and a wide variety of expressive and over-the-top animations. This, coupled with the game's short development time, which was just a bit over a year, is why you see some pretty sparse basic environments when compared to your Onimushas or Devil May Cry's. Using Okami's engine while retaining a locked behind-the-back camera also presented another problem. It was never really meant to be used this way, which is why you saw behind the curtain every so often. But that was okay. Again, the team wanted to emphasize the wacky post-apocalyptic world and the over-the-top characters which populated it. Gene was not your typical Capcom protag, and he didn't even want to be. In fact, none of the characters, from Olivia to Azel and especially Gorilla Mask, felt like your cookie-cutter cast. You get the impression that Mikami and the rest of the staff wanted to poke fun at what was popular at the time, while obviously paying homage to things like Fist of the North Star and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Thus, crazier and crazier ideas crept into the game, like a musical number, poisoned chihuahuas, having Mikami's severed head as an in-joke item, a boss that may or may not be a man in a gorilla suit, and all other manner of insanity.
Wait, you're not a human, are you?
Quite the contrary, having limited time and technology was almost freeing to Mikami in a way, compared to the mountain of pressure and hundreds of staff members he had to manage when working on Resident Evil. So while GODHAND was not going to be some polished mainstream 20-hour epic, it wasn't meant to be. It was just a game that Mikami was having fun making. He felt that since he had produced or directed several high-profile games for Capcom during his tenure there, he had no qualms about spending a bit of their money to make something specifically for himself. Cut to E3 2006, where GODHAND was first shown to the public with a playable demo. A demo that focused on gameplay and didn't contain any cutscenes, so lots of people didn't quite know what to make of it yet, especially when you factor in the difficulty. It's not a simple arcade beat-em-up you can just coast through, but rather a hard-as-nails combat experience where you have to have situational awareness at all times, as well as maximizing all of your abilities. Just bashing the attack button over and over would only get you so far, and when I say so far, I mean getting you fucking dead.
You are dead! Not a big surprise!
It's been reported that when Clover saw people's reaction to the humor the demo did contain, that they decided to inject more into it, but I can confidently say that's not the case. GODHAND released in mid-September of 2006, and E3 was in May, and when you add in the lead-up time to manufacturing and shipping, well, that doesn't really make much sense. You need to be content complete that close to launch, so the humor and attitude couldn't have been some last-minute change based on feedback. They would have needed to call in the voice actors for another round of recording, as well as the QA department working overtime to test anything new, and that's simply way more work than was feasible in 2 short months. It's just not how traditional game development goes, especially back in 2006, an era totally bereft of the Day 1 patch. Mikami, in that 2020 interview I mentioned earlier, also made no illusions about how he felt GODHAND was going to fare at retail, joking with a staff member, "If everything goes wrong, we might sell 100,000 copies," making light of the game's chances. So when it very much didn't sell that amount, he was actually probably relieved. Now, while most of you might assume it was some type of massive mega bomb, that wasn't actually the case, at least in Japan. It would go on to sell 60,000 copies, which was higher than Inaba was predicting, as he felt they would have been lucky to sell even half that. So, in terms of a quick additional project that was made on the cheap, it did alright. And while numbers in the West were never released, we can safely assume they weren't much better. Advertising was pretty minimal, as you'd probably expect, but no one can deny that striking box art. Originally, both the Japanese and American versions were supposed to be more graphic, with the fist clearly coming out of the back of the head, but this was nixed by Capcom marketing. Try to act surprised. Aside from having a less cooler cover, what probably didn't help GODHAND's chances was the infamous IGN review. You know I was going to bring it up, which slapped Mikami's latest with a 3 out of 10 that'll probably be remembered until this flaming planet of pollution and regret we live on explodes in a celestial firestorm. Now, what surprised me while researching for this video is the lack of any other major review outlets that were nearly as harsh. The lowest one I can easily find is a 6 out of 10 from Game Informer. Everyone else was pretty positive, or at the very least, fair. I had assumed, just based on memory, that GODHAND was received very divisively at the time of its release, with several other sites agreeing with IGN's scorching take, but no. Regardless, Mikami didn't actually care about the game's critical reception. Again, he wanted to make something unique for a very specific audience, so it could have received a million 3 out of 10s. It wouldn't really have mattered to him. In fact, years later, when Platinum was showing off Vanquish at a press event in Tokyo, Mikami thought he'd have a bit of fun. He asked the crowd at the event, through a translator, "Is there anybody here from IGN?" "Me," said a nearby member of the press. Yeah, thanks for that GODHAND review," which produced a sensible chuckle from the crowd.
You should consider a change in careers.
Now, there's still this stigma around GODHAND due to both the IGN review and the sad fact that 1 month after its release, Clover as a studio was disbanded. There's a variety of reasons for this, with one of the main ones being that Okami simply didn't move enough units to justify keeping their doors open. So for God Hand, well, it just happened to come out at not the best time in the world, as the decision to shutter Clover was probably already in motion. You all know the rest. Clover broke up and went platinum, while Mikami would eventually form Tango Gameworks, although I'm gonna be honest, I'm getting increasingly worried about Ghostwire Tokyo. As for God Hand, well, nowadays, it's looked upon very fondly as a unique example from a creative mind that was doing whatever the hell it wanted. And oh, isn't that cute? IGN even re-reviewed it, which is quite a pointless and hollow gesture that accomplishes absolutely nothing. But whatever, that wasn't the point. Mikami was tired and was burnt out on working on the same thing for more than a decade. Thus, he cited God Hand as the one thing he made exactly the way he wanted, warts and all. He wasn't ordered to make it accessible, shoe in a multiplayer mode, or whatever. He just wanted to make a dumb, unique thing for himself, and was one of the last examples of Capcom publishing a dumb, unique thing, an era that's sorely missed today. Yeah, I just had to find a way to leave out on a bummer there. Oh hey, if you know of any other misunderstood miscreants in the video game or motion picture industries, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or punch your way into the Flophouse VIP Patreon to nominate what you'd want to see in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching! My arm, my arm, my arm, my arm, my arm, my arm, I summon up